to strike the last word.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all of your extraordinary leadership through this difficult time. Mr. Chairman, my vote for the American Rescue Plan, which provided desperately needed assistance to 1 million Americans and put us on the path to recovering from the pandemic, was the most consequential vote I have ever cast. I believe that the legislation we're marking up today is even more significant. This bill illustrates that we have risen to the great challenges of our time that past Congresses and administrations have failed to fully address. The first is the existential threat of climate change. This bill will be the single most important piece of climate legislation we have ever had the chance of passing. And as the International Panel on Climate Change constantly reminds us, the next decade is pivotal to determine our future climate path and the danger of heat increase which may inflict upon ourselves. We owe it to our children, our grandchildren, and the many generations to come to make this legislation a reality. Not only are we making massive investments in the technologies that will reduce our carbon emissions to help stave off the worst effects of a changing climate, we're also setting ourselves up to be the leaders in the sectors that will define the emerging clean energy economy. I'm especially proud of the work that Representative Jimmy Panetta and I have done on the Green Van Act, which uses tax policy to speed the adoption of electric and zero-emission commercial vehicles. According to the EPA, transportation is the single largest source of emissions in the United States, and the transition of commercial vehicles lags far behind personal vehicles. The generous tax credits we provide in this legislation will help upgrade the nation's fleet of working vehicles, from plumber's vans to tractor trailers, into efficient zero-emission models. Another key provision in the package we are considering is the Net Zero Act, which I introduced with Representative Del Bene, a dramatic expansion of the tax credit for direct air capture. I've heard again and again from scientists about the importance of complementing the shift to clean energy sources with the development of negative emissions technology like direct air capture that can actually remove carbon emission from the air. Together with my colleagues, we've crafted a provision that will hasten the development and deployment of direct air capture technology, a critical part of our long-term strategy. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine says we need to take 1 gigaton of CO2 out of the atmosphere each year by 2050 just to hit the Paris targets. I'm also extremely pleased to see the inclusion of the clean hydrogen production and investment tax credit, which we created with Representative Larson's leadership. This legislation to support development of hydrogen energy would help power an important part of our shift to a cleaner transportation sector and create thousands of new green jobs. And an important, forgotten, but really important sector to address emissions is in our buildings, which is 13% of our emissions. And I'm proud to work with Representative Blumenauer on the Energy Efficient Commercial Buildings Act, which was included here to incentivize the reduction of emissions in commercial vehicles. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to highlight the important work that Representatives Bowman and Nadler and Senators Van Hollen, Sanders, Markey, Warren, and Merkley have done on the Polluters Pays Climate Fund Act. This would simply require the largest fossil fuel producers in America, maybe 25 of them, to pay for the greenhouse gas emissions they have emitted over the last 20 years. This is a straightforward and just option to raise added revenue to pay for all the climate investments that we must make. The second challenge we face in this legislation is the widening gap between rich and poor that is tearing at the fabric of our society. This bill puts us on a path to a much more equitable society. In the American Rescue Plan, we expanded and improved the child tax credit, one of the most important beneficial things Congress has done in this or any other century. We put real dollars into the lives of 61 million children in August. The bill before us, we extend this till 2025. It's estimated that the enhancements to this child tax credit will cut the nation's poverty rate in half, and I really want to thank Representative Susan Del Bene for all her leadership on this. Another key element is the large expansion of the low-income housing tax credit, also led by Susan Del Bene, and I've been trying to help her. This will create hundreds of thousands of new homes for Americans. And one of the most important pieces of the bill is the drug pricing reform. Americans have the highest cost of health care in the world, and everyday stories of bankruptcy due to health care costs. Lastly, the inclusion in this bill of the 3% surtax on individuals with gross incomes over $5 million, very similar to legislation that Senator Chris Van Hollen and I proposed last year. This is an elegant and simple way to raise the necessary revenues to make these important investments while also increasing the fairness of our tax code. Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak and for your efforts to craft this historic legislation. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair would recognize